Inflation fell sharply in October and financial markets are now betting there'll be no more rate rises this year. A massive cattle property in Western Australia sells for $300 million and Charlie Munger, one of the greatest investors ever, dies aged 99. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Thursday, the 30th of November, 2023. I'm Michael Thompson and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you have an interview coming up with Nicholas Bernhardt, who is CEO of Informed 365. Now, this is a group that works with some of Australia's biggest companies to stamp out modern slavery.
Did you know 40,000 people in Australia live under conditions of modern slavery? Maybe they're not paid enough. Maybe where they stay, they might be a fruit picker and where their accommodation isn't up to scratch. It is quite amazing how many people suffer from this. And what Nick Bernhardt tries to do is work with these big companies and make sure that their supply chains don't involve modern slavery. It's not an easy thing to do because if you're buying stuff from offshore, how do you know that it's all being sourced in a way that doesn't involve modern slavery? It's a fascinating chat.
Yeah, it sure is. It's coming up a little bit later on. The main story, though, this morning, Sean, annual inflation fell to 4.9% in October, pretty much taking off the table any chance of another interest rate rise when the Reserve Bank meets next week.
Annual inflation fell to 4.9% last month from 5.6% in September as price pressures for consumer goods moderate because of falling demand, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's good news. The monthly consumer price indicator was lower than economists expected, and bond markets have now priced in just a 10% chance of another rate hike when the Reserve Bank Board meets next week. Adding to the argument against a rate hike were comments from Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock earlier in the week, where she said the bank had to be a little bit careful about further tightening. Underlying price pressures also eased in October. That's important, excluding volatile items such as fruit, fuel, and holiday travel. Inflation fell to 5.1%. from 5.5%. Some areas where prices are still rising fast include rents and electricity prices. No surprises there. One segment where prices are falling, very important one, this one, Michael, holidays.
Oh, of course. And Sean, I know I ask you frequently about these volatile items that get excluded, but I'm just so intrigued by fruit being a volatile item. I've never thought of fruit as particularly volatile, but I suppose because it's seasonal and prices fluctuate.
Yeah, seasonal, weather, all those sorts of things. It doesn't really necessarily reflect supply, or it does reflect supply and demand, but it doesn't actually reflect sort of the economic cycle. Fruit specifically is mostly about conditions.
All right, so put it all together. No more rate rises?
Ooh, can't say that yet. The monthly measure is new. It's not as comprehensive as the quarterly measure, which is next due out in late January. About 65% of quarterly components appear in the monthly survey. A bunch of services don't, and that's really where we're seeing some price rises. Clearly, the growth in the price of goods is decelerating. That's good. The picture for services, though, is much more complicated. That will probably determine if the Reserve Bank lifts interest rates again in the new year. But for the rest of 2023 at least, it seems a fairly good bet that there won't be another rate hike.
All right. How did local markets perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 finished up 0.3%, helped by those inflation numbers. The tech sector did best. Xero was up 3% and WiseTech Global jumped 2.5%. The big three miners fell, so too the four major banks and Macquarie Group. Telstra, Woolies, Coles are all lower, though Wesfarmers jumped nearly 1%. Link Administration rose nearly 9%, while some of the gold stocks did well on the back of a higher price for the precious metal. More on that shortly. Leader Newmont rose 5.6%, and Northern Star was up more than 4%. It wasn't such a good day for some of the insurers, including QBE and IAG. Bit of corporate news around. Temple & Webster shares jumped 15% after the homewares retailer spruiked strong sales figures at its annual general meeting yesterday. Pathology company Helios is gaining friends among super funds after having a pretty poor couple of years, culminating with the chair stepping down on Tuesday. Both Host Plus and Australian Retirement Trust have upped their stakes in Helios. Yesterday, the group's share price rose 6%. It's up about 25% in a little over a week. And Fisher & Paykel Healthcare reported increasing revenue and profit in its first half as the respirator manufacturer readjusts to a pre-COVID-19 trading environment. Its share price jumped nearly 8% or so.
And what about international markets? What's going on?
Plenty going on at the moment. It's all about what's going to happen to US interest rates. A couple of Fed governors spoke yesterday morning Australian time and gave some pretty strong hints that rates aren't going to rise anytime soon in the world's largest economy. Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller, a well-known hawk. Actually, isn't Chris Waller a trainer at Randwick?
Yes, he is.
I digress. Anyway, he's also a governor, Christopher Waller, a well-known hawk. A hawk is sort of a governor more likely to be pushing for rates to go higher. He came out and said he's encouraged by a recent slowing of economic activity, which may indicate the central bank's policy is tight enough. That pushed financial markets in a bunch of ways. The US dollar fell to 4-month lows. The Aussie dollar is now buying about 66.5 US cents. Bonds continued to rally. If rates aren't going up anymore, then government bond yields might have peaked. Now, investors have already been buying up bonds, and the Fed's comments only added to that urgency. Wall Street and global stocks have rallied. The S&P 500 is up 8% over the past month, while the MSCI All-Country World Index of Stocks, which is a measure of stocks across the world, obviously, it's up 9% this month, and that's the most since late 2020. Gold hit a 6-month high yesterday. It's up 12% since early October. Bitcoin's back. It's back above 38,000 US dollars a unit. That's an 18-month high. Riskier assets like cryptocurrencies generally do better when borrowing costs are lowered. So if the Fed's not going to lift rates anymore, then that's good for Bitcoin and other cryptos. All eyes now are on Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He's speaking Friday night Australian time. I think everyone's hoping that he'll actually come out and agree that interest rates are probably on pause for the time being.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil has threatened to extend parliamentary sitting this week in order to pass new laws to lock up the worst offenders released from immigration detention.
Ms O'Neil was unable to say whether all 141 non-citizens released into the community following a recent High Court decision will be locked up again as Labor races to finalise the details of its new legislation to ensure they're constitutional. O'Neil warned Parliament would not rise for the end of the year until the government could legislate its response to the High Court, publishing its reasons for its November 8 decision, which ruled indefinite immigration detention unlawful. The House of Representatives is due to rise tonight, while the Senate is slated to sit next week, with an option for the lower house to return for one day. Following calls from Labor for the opposition leader to back the new laws, Deputy Liberal leader Susan Ley said the opposition was willing to work with Labor to lock up violent criminals.
Sean, Chinese-Australian property multi-billionaire Hu Wing-Mao has sold off almost 3 million hectares of West Australian Kimberley cattle country to an investment consortium for close to $300 million.
It's one of the biggest rural deals of the year and comes as Chinese property companies come under plenty of pressure. The portfolio of cattle stations, known as the Kimberley Cattle Portfolio, spans the 3 million hectares. It's about the size of Belgium. It's huge. It's been sold to one of Canada's top investment managers, Alberta Investment Management Corporation, and local manager New Agriculture. The station operates as a single large-scale portfolio. It runs about 45 to 50,000 breeders.
Harvey Norman says sales have picked up in recent weeks, thanks in part to the Black Friday sales, but over the past 5 months, the electronics and homeware leader recorded an 8% drop in turnover.
Executive Chair Gerry Harvey and his wife, Chief Executive Katie Page, fronted shareholders at the retailer's annual general meeting yesterday. The board received a first strike against the remuneration report, with nearly 82% of shareholders voting against it. That's actually Qantas-esque. I think Qantas came in at 83%, didn't it? Anyway.
That is huge.
It is huge. The updated sales figures are actually a touch better than a month ago when the retailer warned pre-tax profits for the September 6 months had halved. Harvey Norman reported sales at company-owned stores in Australia and overseas and franchised Harvey Norman Domain and Joyce Main sites. Gerry Harvey said Christmas could be a bit quiet given the sales over the past weekend. However, the group's share price closed up more than 4%, and that's because the bad news yesterday wasn't quite as bad as it was 4 weeks ago.
How about this one, Sean? Carnival Australia will pull 2 cruise ships from Melbourne after Ports Victoria increased docking fees by 15%.
Carnival Australia's Chief Strategy Officer, Teresa Lloyd, said it was unreasonable for the state government to up the tax so quickly. More than 100,000 Victorians went on Carnival cruises in the last year, and the industry pumped about $380 million into the state's economy. Ports Minister Melissa Horne said the fees were raised by a modest amount to $32 per passenger from $28.50 to pay for maintenance at Melbourne's station pier. She also pointed out that this financial year, there's a record 126 ships booked to dock at the pier, and 105 ships have already booked for the next financial years, so she didn't seem too worried about it.
So that's $3.50 per passenger.
Yeah, so
is that right?
So $3.50 per passenger, right? Which isn't 15%. I know we're going here, 10%. It depends on how you measure it, to be perfectly honest. So I don't think we can just do it as simply as that.
Oh, no, that's okay. I wasn't questioning the 10 or 15%. I don't think my brain worked that quickly. I was just going $3.50 per passenger. Seems quite an extreme reaction to pull two cruise ships on the basis of $3.50.
Well, there's been a few state government taxes recently that have really upset corporates. The biggest have been the Queensland mining taxes, and some of the resource companies have been very upset about that. This is another one. There was also that EV tax, which was struck down in the High Court. There was another Victorian one. Victoria yesterday said that they'd be paying back money they had collected on that EV tax. I think corporates are starting to get a bit frustrated with state governments clipping the ticket on things.
Okay. Turning to international news now, Sean, Hamas and Israel were expected to release more hostages and prisoners overnight, the last day of a prolonged 6-day truce in the Gaza Strip conflict.
Attention is now focused on whether mediator Qatar can negotiate another extension. According to Bloomberg, Israel has said the truce could be prolonged further, provided Hamas continues to free at least 10 Israeli hostages per day. But with fewer women and children still in captivity, keeping the guns quiet for longer may require negotiating to free at least some Israeli men for the first time. The total number of hostages released so far is 81. They've been mostly Israeli women and children, along with foreign citizens. Separately, foreign ministers of the Group of Seven Nations on Tuesday called in a joint statement for an extension of the ceasefire and more humanitarian aid. There's about 159 hostages remaining in Gaza.
Now, we mentioned this one at the top of the show. Sean, Charlie Munger, the long-time offsider of Warren Buffett, has died aged 99.
It was always the Warren and Charlie show, or it was for 60 years. Munger and Buffett transformed Berkshire Hathaway from a not-so-successful textile maker into an $800 billion empire. In a statement, Buffett said Berkshire Hathaway could not have been built to its present status without Charlie's inspiration, wisdom and participation. From 1965 to 2021, Berkshire averaged an annual gain of 20%, which is about twice the pace of the S&P 500 index. Quite remarkable. Munger was very much the straight man in the relationship, known for his pointed one-liners and dislike of corporate excess. One of his last one-liners was at this year's Berkshire Hathaway annual general meeting. It makes plenty of sense. And I quote the great Charlie Munger, "There is so much money now in the hands of so many smart people all trying to outsmart one another. It's a radically different world from the world we started in."
Yeah, well said. Now, Sean, last one. We're going to start hearing more now about challenges to Donald Trump for the Republican nomination for next year's US election. And one name we're going to hear a lot about is Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, who's winning some influential supporters.
Haley is running number 3 in the polls behind Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But now an influential lobby group with close ties to mega billionaire Charles Koch has come out in favour of Haley to beat Trump. Americans for Prosperity Action announced their plans in the past 24 hours, saying Haley offers America the opportunity to turn the page on the current political era and defeat Joe Biden next November. It's Koch's first foray into politics since 2012. And with $60 billion in the bank, he has some serious sway. For their part, the Trump campaign, when asked about it, dismissed the backing as the political arm of the China First, America Last movement. The spokesperson then went on with all this vitriol against them. What amazes me, right? Donald Trump is Donald Trump. Why is it that all the people that work for him have to imitate him? I actually find that quite frustrating.
It's a good point. Look, you know what? Maybe it's like any kind of business where kind of everyone takes the lead from the person at the top. And as soon as the standard is set, everyone kind of matches that, right?
Some of these people must be smarter than that.
Maybe I'm trying to be too rational about this.
And look, Michael, just quickly before we end, we had a dedicated list to Mark Reed help us out with some confusion over how many people watched the Cricket World Cup final. Mark sent us through an ESPN Crick Info story that said the World Cup final between India and Australia was watched by 300 million people with a peak concurrency of 130 million, making it the most watched cricket match on TV, according to Disney Star. The final also broke digital viewership records, with Disney Plus Hotstar recording a high of 59 million concurrent viewers, the most for any live sports event. Basically, 20 to 25% of the Indian population was watching. Remarkable. Thank you, Mark Reed.
Yeah, that certainly is quite incredible. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Nicholas Bernhardt, CEO of Informed 365.
Yep, all about modern slavery and the efforts to stamp it out. Still 40,000 people in Australia work under modern slavery conditions. Horrendous.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Sean, before we go, I just have to give a very quick mention. We talked yesterday briefly about the new episode of How Do They Afford That, which comes out every Wednesday. This week's episode, and it obviously features me speaking with Canna Campbell, the founder of Sugar Mama TV. And it's all about kind of making your money work a bit harder for you. And this week's episode is about Christmas on a budget, really trying to kind of have a fun, enjoyable, Merry Christmas without blowing the bank. Anyway, in the episode, Canna refers to the potential to get a Christmas bonus. And she was wondering whether our Fear and Greed colleague, Adam Lang, would be providing Christmas bonuses this year to all of us. And as part of it, she unintentionally referred to him as, I want to get this right, the big boss daddy of Fear and Greed. And I think that's a nickname that could well stick.
Yeah, big boss daddy Adam Lang, the grand kahuna.
Yeah, and anyway, Canna is mortified that she said this, and she begged us to edit it out before it went in. But you know what?
Yeah, you've doubled down.
You say it in front of a microphone, it's going to get in there. So anyway, we'll all be submitting our applications, our requests to the big boss daddy Adam Lang for a Fear and Greed Christmas bonus, maybe a Fear and Greed Christmas party. We'll take this up with him on the weekend edition. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 30th of November, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.